In January 1957, the Suez Crisis claimed its most significant victim, the Prime Minister.
Deep down inside, you knew it had got to happen. I was sitting at home. It was 3 minutes to 6. The telephone went. I answered it. He said, "I have resigned as Prime Minister. You will hear it on the 6 o'clock news."
It was announced from Buckingham Palace that the resignation of Sir Anthony Eden as Prime Minister had been accepted, and a statement from Number 10 gave ill health as the reason.
Eden resigned in an atmosphere of bitter recrimination. He was accused of lying over the Anglo-French invasion of Suez in collusion with Israel. A bleak ending for a career expected to be crowned in glory. For years, it seemed as if Anthony Eden could do no wrong. The golden boy of British politics, he had intelligence, social compassion, and sex appeal.
The older the woman, the deeper the swoon. Anthony Eden was extremely attractive to women.
He had what I would call peach skin and dancing eyes, very expressive eyes, and a very nice smile.
There were rumours Eden's love life might bring him down, but in the end, it was statesmanship which failed him.
9/10 of his career was really triumphant, and the Suez thing, whatever the ultimate verdict will be, was a sad ending.
And that he should be remembered for his ultimate failure, his loss of judgment over Suez, is really very bad luck on him, retrospectively. A man should be remembered for his total achievement and not for a single aberration.
Anthony Eden began his political education in the trenches of the First World War. The third son of an impoverished baronet, he had volunteered straight from Eton. Aged 20, he was awarded the Military Cross for gallantry. The war, in which he lost 2 brothers, would influence him throughout his life.
He was an impressionable person, a very sensitive person. There's no doubt his experiences of men under terrible stresses and dangers in the First World War had given him a caring for people, ordinary people and their problems, which was, I think, quite exceptional for somebody coming from his aristocratic, rather grand background.
After war service and a first in Arabic at Oxford, Eden's ambition was to become a Tory MP. His message was firmly anti-war.
War is to hate it for its blind destruction and its callous cruelty.
I think Anthony Eden's brand of conservatism was strongly paternalist, which of course he shared with Harold Macmillan because they had both of them enlisted and been in the trenches in World War I, and they had served with and in the company of working class people who they regarded as their duty to protect. And they were unable to protect them in combat very well because of the idiocy of the High Command. But the recollection of the casualties that they suffered remained with them for the rest of their political careers.
That's what gave him his passionate desire to be a peacemaking diplomat, which makes all the more ironical the circumstances in which he finally left office.
Aged 26, Eden was elected MP for Warwick and Leamington, and in 1935 was promoted to Minister for the League of Nations.
Seldom, if ever, has an Englishman received such a wild U.S. welcome. To America, Anthony Eden has come to represent the young idealist fighting for democracy.
If we show courage, firmness, and moderation, there are no international difficulties that cannot be solved.
He became one of the most sought-after MPs on the London circuit.
The waiting crowds watched the earlier presentations anxiously in patient hopes of the weather, and among the spectators note Mr. Anthony Eden.
It was there he fell in love with Beatrice Beckett, the daughter of a Yorkshire banker.
Beatrice was in love with a local squire who my father disapproved of. And he knew Anthony, being a politician and so on, and was very fond of him. And I suppose you could say it was a bit of a matchmake, yes.
They soon married. The adoring Eden wrote, "I have won a treasure, the rarest on earth, and she actually loves me." 2 sons followed. Everything seemed in place for a glittering future.
He was good looking, he was attractive, he dressed well, he had what you might call sort of panache. We have nobody who looked like Eden, who behaved like Eden, and who represented something in our society which I think we rather lack now, really. Where's the glamour?
His hair was wonderful. He always smelt delicious. Whatever trumpers were producing, aftershave and hair lotion, everything else. It was just a kind of wonderful feeling of luxury and cleanliness and newness. And all these things made him different from ordinary politicians who are rather rumpled and have dandruff and are always in a hurry and so on. And Anthony was always poised.
Aged 38, Eden was promoted to Foreign Secretary in Stanley Baldwin's government.
Mr. Eden becomes the youngest Foreign Secretary for 84 years.
The world was at Eden's feet, but beneath the dazzling public image, he was not a happy man. Beatrice had no interest in being a politician's wife.
A man as preoccupied with public affairs as Anthony Eden was probably not a very easy man to live with. Someone who was overworked to the point of sometimes nervous outbreaks of temper. Someone whose whole mind was devoted to the task of the boxes and so on. Wives find red boxes a pain in the neck, because when they want to talk to their husband about Christmas or something, he's going through his 3rd red box. And Eden probably had 5 red boxes most nights.
She knew she was attractive to men, and they were attracted to her. I don't know about her love affairs because I was too young to know anything about what was going on. But I'm told by my other sisters that she did have flings with various men.
Rejected by the wife he loved, Eden enjoyed the attentions of other women.
Every year until war, then Albert Hall would have the Chelsea Arts Ball. It was the most fabulous affair. The whole floor of the Albert Hall turned into a dance floor and a fancy dress. And I was invited to go. A girl who was in the same rooms as I was, Clodagh, was invited to go, the 2 of us, in the group of the Edens. But afterwards I asked Clodagh, I said, well, tell me, what was Eden like? I mean, what was he like? So after all, he was quite a figure. Well, she said, he was all right. She said, she had quite a lot of difficulties, footy under the table, she said.
He used to come to our London house. This was before the war. And I think he was quite keen on my mother. I mean, she went out with him a few times. And he was a terrific ladies' man. She adored him, like most of the women who crossed his path. And so when he was coming, she was much brighter and better dressed and generally full of joie de vivre and so on. And I don't think he ever broke her heart or anything like that. I think it was a relationship that just kind of petered out when the war started.
Eden had become Foreign Secretary at a crisis point in world affairs. The dictators were on the march.
He was one of the few British statesmen actually to have known Hitler. He had at least 2 long conversations with him, tete-a-tete. He says in his diary, I rather liked Hitler. He had a certain shyness. And they talked about the war. And they've discovered that they'd been on opposite sides in the same sector of the front, in Battle of the Somme or something. And they may have shot at each other. Both missed.
With Mussolini's invasion of Abyssinia and then Hitler's occupation of the Rhineland, Eden faced the greatest challenge of his career. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain advocated appeasement, while Winston Churchill demanded a stand against the dictators.
Anyone can see that public opinion is growing in favour of compulsory national service in all its forms, and especially in the highest form.
The Foreign Secretary was torn, but decided for the moment to support the government line.
There were many in the Parliament who felt that Churchill was over the hill, that he was a has-been, he was already 65 years of age, why associate oneself with someone who was passé?
For 2 years, Eden went along with appeasement. Then in February 1938, he resigned from the Foreign Office in protest at the government's failure to stand up to Mussolini. He resigned partly from conscience, but also because his advice was ignored.
Well, it was certainly portrayed as an anti-appeasement move, but it could equally well be interpreted as being motivated by a fit of pique, because the specific issue which prompted him to resign as Foreign Secretary was the fact that the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, was trying to conduct foreign policy behind the Foreign Secretary's back.
To have resigned over appeasement secured Eden a place in history. But there were question marks over his judgment. Some felt all along that Eden had been over-promoted and that he was more style than substance.
Like every politician of any ability, and certainly one who had been very successful when young, Eden always had his detractors. There was always an element in the Tory party that thought he was slightly overdressed, slightly too dapper, not nearly as bright up here as his appearance led you to believe.
When war did break out, Eden's career was rescued by Churchill when he became Prime Minister in May 1940. He appointed Eden Secretary for War, and then once again Foreign Secretary.
My grandfather felt that he was less tainted by the brush of appeasement than obviously the other members of the government, and he saw in him a useful ally.
One great advantage Eden enjoyed, and indeed Churchill enjoyed, from the outbreak of war onwards, was a trust in each other. Churchill was quite selective about people he was prepared to trust and people for whom he had admiration. And I've always thought that those two were closer together at this crisis than anybody else.
Just to see him about, you felt this is a man of sensitivity, intelligence, courage, and above all, patriotism, because that was his absolute dominant characteristic. What he was entirely preoccupied with was doing what he thought to be right for Britain.
He accompanied Churchill to every single one of the major summit meetings during the war, but he was number two, and all the focus of criticism and praise was on Churchill, and not on Eden, who was regarded very much as a chief of staff.
Eden insisted a meticulous record was kept of all the wartime summit meetings. At Tehran, he was invited to lunch with the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov.
The lunch started and we were served caviar to begin with, so I started tucking into the caviar. And suddenly Eden looked down at me and he said, "You are taking all this down, are you, Lungi?" And I sort of said, and I couldn't answer because I had nothing to take. I had no paper. I wondered whether I should write on the napkin. He said, "You know, I shall want minutes." was really quite stern with me, and I was quite scared. And I looked in all my pockets, and I found in my back pocket of my uniform a tiny diary, and that's all I had. I started scribbling like mad from that point, and of course, again from that point, I had nothing to eat.
Superb administrator, diplomat, patriot and faithful number 2. But he was essentially a Foreign Office man, particularly when it came to the difficult task of dealing with the Soviet Union. Whatever the cost, the Soviets had to be kept on side. Eden twice visited Moscow to negotiate.
He gave way all the time because he thought he was making a good compromise, and anyway he wanted to keep Molotov and therefore Stalin happy as well. I was very junior, small cog in the whole affair, and it was at this point that I got the impression then, and I'm not just speaking with hindsight, I really felt it then, that Eden didn't care much about individuals.
In Moscow, the Russian prisoners, who had fought for the Germans and were now held by the British, were discussed. To the Foreign Office, they were an inconvenience to be settled without delay. But if they were sent back to the Soviet Union, they faced almost certain death.
Eden was taking what one might judge to be the Foreign Office line at the time, and just as the Foreign Office in the 30s had taken the view that nothing should be done that might make Herr Hitler angry. So at the end of the war, their view was that nothing should be done that might make Uncle Joe Stalin angry.
To the Soviets, these prisoners were traitors, anti-communist and pro-German.
And we knew very well that the Russians, soldiers who joined the Wehrmacht, would be shot without trial if they were surrendered to Stalin. Eden was the prime mover to repatriate to Russia Russian soldiers who had been persuaded to join the German army and fight against their own country after they had been taken prisoner by the Germans. It was a very tricky situation, because if they were wearing German uniform, they were, and we captured them, they were our prisoners of war. And so they were entitled to the Geneva Convention, which states, among other things, that you don't send your prisoners of war to places, to other parts of the world where they would be in danger of their lives.
In August 1944, Eden wrote, "We cannot afford to be sentimental." He signed the repatriation agreement the following year at Yalta. Over 40,000 Russians were returned to Stalin. Most were killed or starved to death.
At Yalta, at the Yalta conference, the very last formal act was the signature by Eden to what I would call one of the blackest pages, the most treacherous pages in the whole of our history.
Labour won a landslide victory in the election of July 1945. With Churchill out of office, Eden seemed out of step with the times, unable to accept the idea of a Labour government.
Each and all call for a government firm in policy and united in purpose. I should imagine that nobody could pretend the present government could claim to be that. And so now we have to try to do better. Thank you very much.
He was really rather like, somebody from a Noel Coward play, rather than a politician with a conscience. Certainly in Home Affairs, he didn't make any great mark in opposition after 1945 when I was in Parliament, and certainly not on Home Affairs. It was the, esoteric confines of the Foreign Office were his natural environment, not crusading among the streets of the industrial North.
With defeat came a new chapter in Eden's life. He was often alone in his Sussex country house. His eldest son had been killed in the last days of the war, and his marriage to Beatrice was by now virtually over. She had taken up with an American newspaperman.
Anthony was terribly upset, and he wrote me a letter saying, "Martin, would you possibly go over to America and bring her back?" Well, I couldn't do that. It was not, I felt it wasn't my business to interfere with that sort of romantic arrangement.
Eden's private life was at a crossroads when he met the American-born wife of an English aristocrat, Dorothy Hewitt, at a country house party. She was a celebrated beauty.
I knew the house very well. I had spent many weekends there. So I wandered down into the library. It was a huge room. And I came in, and there was a man sitting with his, on a sort of window seat with his back to the light. He came over and introduced himself, and of course I recognized him immediately. And we sat down and we talked and asked me all about myself, who I was, what I did, and all kinds of things like that. Every chance he got to talk to me, we talked. There was a spark on both our parts. I thought it was enough of a spark that it was dangerous. And then I happened to meet him at dinner one night when I was alone and he was alone. And he asked me if he could take me home. And I said yes. And he said, well, why don't we stop by and have a drink at my house first? So we did. And I guess that was the beginning of the romantic part.
The relationship was encouraged by Dorothy's politically ambitious husband, Lord Beatty. He saw no problem with his wife taking influential lovers as long as she stayed married to him.
In the aristocracy, particularly in those days, it was common for husbands and wives to have different partners. Many of them kept their marriages together, but they didn't share rooms together, or they didn't cohabit or do anything like that. They had other partners, sometimes several.
But when Dorothy told her husband she wanted to leave him and marry Anthony Eden, he refused to agree.
He turned really very, very nasty and did ridiculous things that he needn't have done. I mean, he had detectives questioning Anthony's servants, and all he had to do was just, ask me, and he knew. There was no question. I mean, your wife is going out 3 or 4 times a week, and you know where she's going. You don't have to send detectives to find out where she's been.
Churchill was furious. He would not permit Eden to be dragged through the courts in a messy divorce case. Another solution had to be found. A young officer was asked to play the role of Dorothy's lover to keep Eden's name out of the papers.
I had a young friend who was in the Coldstream Guards, and he came and sat in my apartment till 2 o'clock in the morning while I went to bed, and David had his detectives outside. So that settled that without hurting Anthony.
The love affair had brought Eden's career to the brink of disaster.
If I had married him after that, he would have had to resign. It ended, and we went our separate ways, and it was a lovely interlude. I will never forget it. But I have no regrets.
Anthony Eden was Member of Parliament for Warwick and Leamington Spa for nearly 34 years. His constituency was known as the Garden of Eden. Warwick and Leamington was a Tory stronghold, and Eden was idolised by the party faithful.
He was good-mannered, he was pleasant, he was concerned, he cared about people, he cared about situations. He didn't cultivate it in any way. It was a natural thing.
He was like an oil painting, and He was so distinguished looking that you can imagine his photograph hanging in a great hall and being admired by everyone.
With women in particular, there was a hero worship, I'm sure there was, and they showed it. Clapping, cheering, patting him on the shoulders, longing to get close enough to touch him, that sort of... the same that happens these days with fans and pop stars.
Eden was always known for being well-dressed, sometimes too well-dressed.
He occasionally preferred the double-breasted waistcoat, something which I've always had a slight doubt about, and my tailor has always had a slight doubt about double-breasted waistcoats. He wore that famous Homburg, which became known as the Eden Homburg. I wore one of those. I don't think that can be held against anybody. He was always pretty correct around the neck. He very seldom wore soft-collared shirts. When I remember him, certainly as Foreign Secretary, the uniform was stiff white collar and a pretty smart-looking tie. I think dapper. Here you had this very strong character, a very brave man, and a very able man, dressed ever so slightly like a shop walker.
After 6 years, the Tory party scraped back into power, and Churchill was again Prime Minister. Eden was back at the Foreign Office for the third time and not happy about it.
He was the chosen successor, had been the chosen successor for many years, and it was just a question of when Churchill would make way for Eden. And, of course, Churchill, like many who have held the highest office, was reluctant to quit.
I do remember Anthony Eden arriving to see Winston Churchill one morning in number 10, in the Prime Minister's flat at the top of number 10, and hearing the lift, which we were so used to, clanking up from the ground floor, and Anthony Eden saying, with total frustration, "I am at the end of my tether, and this means resignation. I am going to resign." And he repeated that phrase as he went along the passage to the Prime Minister's bedroom where he worked. And the door was shut, and we all waited on tenterhooks. And 10 minutes later, Anthony Eden, the Foreign Secretary, emerged. Not a word was said, and he left number 10 as Foreign Secretary still.
All concerned have done a wonderful job.
It's very difficult to be a number two. You can't help getting impatient after some years of being a number two, particularly when you've been labelled, as he was clearly labelled by Winston, as his heir apparent. Because you can't really show your own self without appearing to be rivaling your number one and almost trying to hurry him off the stage.
Someone who had long admired Anthony Eden was Churchill's niece, Clarissa.
Well, I suppose I was first aware of him when I was about 16, and he came sort of shooting into the room, full of vitality and sparks and things, and he was naturally a famous figure, so I was interested to see him. I was particularly interested in his clothes, because he was wearing this dark green tweed jacket and dark green tweed pinstripe trousers, which I thought was the most extraordinary get-up. And in fact, I kept the suit, and it's still somewhere here in the loft.
Thousands of Londoners collected outside Caxton Hall to see what they could of the wedding. And when Mr. Anthony Eden arrived, they gave him a warm-hearted reception. This he happily acknowledged.
In 1950, Eden's divorce from Beatrice was finalised. The affair with Dorothy Hewitt was over, and in 1952, Clarissa Churchill accepted his hand in marriage. It was a film star wedding, and the Edens were to be happily married for 25 years.
The cameras and smiled happily at spectators before driving off.
Any hopes that being married to the Prime Minister's niece might smooth the path to succession were dashed when Eden's health let him down. Gallbladder surgery had resulted in irreparable damage to the bile duct, and further major operations followed.
I think the problem to begin with was perfectly simple gallbladder, and then as it was never treated, it became, very sort of the equivalent of peritonitis, and therefore became a very difficult operation, which had to be finally resolved in Boston, where there was this man who did nothing else but these one particular operations.
Eden, to me, was never the same after his terrible illness following that disastrous gallbladder operation. I feared that he probably was not going to live. I didn't say that to anybody else. I scarcely said it to myself until afterwards, but I think it was touch and go. Certainly if he had not gone to America to have the emergency operation, I'm afraid he would have died.
After 3 grueling bouts of surgery, it would take Eden the rest of the year to recover. He returned to the Foreign Office determined to reassert his authority and stepped into a major world crisis. France's colonial war in Indochina was one of the first serious conflicts of the Cold War. America, now with its arsenal of nuclear weapons, feared Asia might go communist if the French were defeated.
Nuclear weapons had entered into the strategic thinking of both sides. It was the invisible cloud over everything.
The Americans kept on supporting, equipping, supplying the French, mostly after Dulles became a foreign secretary. For him, the communists had to be crushed, I repeat, crushed, physically crushed.
The US Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, and his advisors were prepared to take the world to the edge of nuclear war to prevent the spread of communism.
They wanted to get Eisenhower's approval of the use of nukes somehow or other to save this terribly deteriorating French situation in Indochina. And of course, the British didn't want anything to do with nuclear weapons.
Eden did not agree with Dulles. He wanted a political settlement and flew to Geneva to negotiate with the French, the Americans, the Russians and the Chinese. Meanwhile, Dulles pressed for the use of tactical nuclear weapons.
Eden and Dulles were waiting for the lift in the hotel in Geneva, and it was evident that Eden was annoyed with Dulles, and I heard him say, "The trouble with you is that you want World War III."
The way the British worked was remarkable. It was helped also by the fact that the co-chairman was Molotov, and that Molotov was very anxious that it should not turn to a situation where there would be an open war between China and the United States.
Eden's skill was in persuading the Chinese to accept a settlement when their side was winning.
It was the last occasion on which the United Kingdom was able to change the course of world events.
Geneva was a triumph for Eden, the high point of his diplomatic career.
The conference has fulfilled its mission.
And then somebody asked Mr. Eden, what about the next step?
Next step, as far as I'm concerned, is to get a little sleep, of which I'm rather short.
But America refused to sign the agreement with China, and Dulles felt cheated by the British Foreign Secretary.
Dulles was really quite bitter about it. He told some of the American reporters, including myself, a couple of offhand remarks. He was quite frank about Eden. By this point, he obviously had come to distrust and dislike And he said, compared to Churchill, he didn't have the strength or moral character.
The world would soon be able to judge for itself. After 13 years as heir apparent, Eden's wait was finally over when Churchill resigned as Prime Minister. He gave a farewell dinner at Downing Street for the Queen and Prince Philip.
He, after this very successful dinner party, his private secretary escorted him to his bedroom, and he sat on the edge of the bed, brooding, and the secretary thought, well, he's thinking about relinquishing office and leaving, and his last night in this historic house and all the events that took place here. And he suddenly turned round and said, you know, I don't think Anthony can do it.
Although still not in the best of health, Eden immediately called a general election. He needed to prove he could win the vote in his own right as Prime Minister.
I'd never been on an election tour before, so I didn't know if it was exceptional in any way. But what I did know was I was astonished at all these men swarming round and banging the car and saying, you know, good luck and so on. I mean, I knew something exceptional was happening.
In May 1955, Eden was returned with what has remained the largest percentage of the popular vote recorded by any Conservative since the war.
The first Prime Minister in near 100 years to lead a government returned to power with an increased majority. We all look to him for leadership towards a happy and prosperous Britain.
The hopes were not to be fulfilled. Eden was to find the Prime Minister's job very different from the role of Foreign Secretary. His indecision over Europe provoked the first whispers of discontent in the Tory party.
It was patriotism in a sense. He didn't want us to lose any part of our sovereignty. He wanted to save our independence. He made a grievous error. He refused to sign the agreement which would have admitted us to Europe. Not just admitted us, but we had offered to us on the plate the leadership of Europe. I once asked Merrill Macmillan why we missed that opportunity. And he answered, I remember him looking at me and holding my gaze, one word, Anthony.
We now stand on our own feet, and we intend to continue to do so.
Journalists picked up on what they saw as Eden's shortcomings. The Daily Telegraph ran a story headlined, "Waiting for the smack of firm government." The Labour Party joined in.
To me, poise, matinee idol, charm and all that don't count in politics. What counts is grit and judgment, and I think Eden was lacking in both.
Ill health began to take its toll.
After he became Prime Minister, I heard a lot of rumblings of irritability and bad temper, and maybe his judgment, due to the illness, was impaired.
Eden's gallbladder problems continued. By now, his nervous system was affected by the powerful prescribed drugs he was taking.
No argument at all that these were used. They had no bearing, of course, on his state of health. They didn't improve the gallbladder condition. They didn't improve the duct, which had been damaged and not properly repaired, couldn't be repaired. They did nothing of that. But they they kept him working through what otherwise would have been an incapacitating disorder.
If he had a pain, we were given a marvelous thing called pethidine, which again I used to use on occasions, which I think is a sort of mammoth painkiller.
The fact is that the operation, which was first botched and then not completely set right on Eden's gallbladder, led to a condition of the liver which badly affected the nervous system. In order to offset the damage to the nervous system, unquestionably Anthony Eden did was prescribed barbiturate to calm things down and amphetamine to lift things up a bit.
In this state of health and mind, Eden was forced to confront his greatest challenge yet, the Egyptian leader, Colonel Nasser.
There was a wave of nationalism sweeping the Middle East, and they were no longer going to be the subordinates of powerful Western people after their oil.
When Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, the main supply line through Egypt to the British Empire in the east, Eden was determined to win it back.
Our quarrel is not with Egypt, still less with the Arab world. It is with Colonel Nasser.
Nasser was a tremendous threat in the Middle East, and the Middle East was of enormous importance to us at the time.
We all know this is how fascist governments behave. And we all remember, only too well, what the cost can be in giving in to fascism.
Eden saw Nasser as another Hitler or Mussolini, a dictator threatening Britain's vital interests. British forces mobilized, but the Americans, pursuing their own agenda in the Middle East, were not prepared to help.
The growing exasperation of Anthony Eden, the fact that Dulles perpetually promised to help and then always at the last minute backtracked and double-crossed. And Dulles was making the thing quite impossible.
In the secret deal which would lead to his downfall, Eden agreed that the Israelis would invade Egypt and the British and French would intervene to secure the canal.
He felt we had to go on alone without informing the Americans because the British national interest was of such vital importance that we had to abandon all hope of American help and go ahead with it.
As the invasion began, Dulles, no friend of Eden, and the American President, Dwight Eisenhower, wasted little time in reacting.
As you know, this country will not go to war, ever, while I am occupying my present post, unless the Congress is called into session.
Within hours of the invasion, with the capture of the canal in sight, there was a run on the pound and Britain faced bankruptcy. Eisenhower condemned Britain's actions and Eden called off the attack.
The moment the Americans really put on the pressure and the run on sterling proceeded, which was positively encouraged by the Americans, did nothing to help us over sterling, then Eden showed a streak of appalling weakness. He just meekly climbed down.
Eden had underestimated the power of America, and this raised doubts about his leadership.
I said to my grandfather, "Grandpa, what do you think of the Suez business?" He said, I don't know that I should have had the courage to start it all in the first place. I certainly wouldn't have dared stop halfway.
Don't forget, Suez was, if it was anything at all, there's going in and coming out, were matters of judgment. I'm not qualified to say the extent to which his ailments, or what he was doing to reduce his ailments, impaired the judgment. But that's the area where my mind, ever since all that happened, that's the area where my mind has always circled.
The public outcry over Suez, stirred up by the Labour Party, was ferocious. Eden was used to being feted by the British people. Now it was very different.
And there is only one way in which they can even begin to restore their tarnished reputation. And that is to get out, get out, get out!
The country was bitterly divided, and the Prime Minister had cultivated too few political friends in his own party who were prepared to support him. Hostile questions were raised in Parliament about the failure of Suez.
There were one or two, of whom I was one, bold enough or audacious enough to get up in that large assembly, or 200 or 300 of us there, and say, I don't agree with what you did over Suez. It was not only unwise, but it was highly immoral. And you were really breaking all the rules you'd made for yourself in your conduct of foreign affairs, all your career, which was being true to our alliances and true to our treaties, and telling the truth to the House of Commons. You did not tell the truth, I said. Is foolishness, is deceit, is lying.
The Prime Minister made the honourable choice, perhaps the only choice left to him. After only 21 months in office, he resigned in January 1957.
I wish my successor all good fortune, and Godspeed to you all. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
In retirement at the country house he'd bought with his wife in Wiltshire, and now created Earl of Avon, Eden continued to feel he'd been misjudged over Suez.
I met him coming along with the dog, and I said, "Good morning, my lord." And he said, "Morning, Nichols." I said, "Nice morning." I said, "Yes." I said, "Have you heard the news?" And he said, "What's that then?" I said, "Colonel Nasser has died." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, that's that. History will prove me right."
Now Eden turned his back on political life to become the full-time country gentleman. His health and his state of mind improved remarkably.
We had a bit of land then, and so he decided that he would breed pedigree cattle. And he chose to breed pedigree Hereford cattle, at which he was very good.
Eden was to live for 20 years in retirement.
The last time I ever met him, I said to him, "Anthony, you seem to me today to be like I remember you 20 years ago." And he made an amazing but terribly sad remark. He said, "Robert, in the last 2 or 3 months, I have had patches of remembering what it's like to feel a well man."
During the winter of 1976, Eden became seriously unwell while on holiday with his wife in Florida. His last wish was that he could die at home in Wiltshire, and James Callaghan, the Labour Prime Minister, arranged for the RAF to fly him back to England. Anthony Eden, 1st Earl of Avon, died on the 14th of January, 1977.
I think that he has, for the moment, had a hard deal from history, yes. He had this great rapport with a lot of people in England, you know. I mean, they thought he was straightforward and honest and had their welfare at heart, and they sort of believed his word.
The tragedy of Eden was that he was the gilded boy of the Conservative Party. There were so great hopes pinned on him, which during the wartime years were amply fulfilled in his role as lieutenant to my grandfather. And it was only when it came to him striking out on his own as the chosen successor and becoming Prime Minister that it turned out that he was really not up to the job.
Next week, in the last of the series, the short-lived but ever-so-bright star that was Janis Joplin. Reputations at 9 next Tuesday, BBC 2.